We're going to kick it off with our first talk. It's from Professor Jonathan Holslag. Holslag works on international politics, and he will share his views on the most salient geopolitical challenges of the coming years and how they will shape us. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a warm welcome, Jonathan Holslag.
Thank you. Now I must say that I have never felt so old-fashioned in my gray suit as here before this audience today. And also I have not often felt so challenged to try to condense an overview of the world politics, and all the challenges that surround us in a presentation of about 25 minutes. Now, I understand very well that it does not come easily, certainly not today, in an event that is supposed to talk about fashion, to take this step back, to scratch you in the hair and to ask what is happening in this world, how to make sense of the growing tensions and the growing uncertainty in the world. And of course, most of all, what does it mean to us? What does it mean to a sector whose focus is mostly on, let's say, the interesting part of life, being creative, being innovative, celebrating beauty, and so forth. It's also not evident because when we have discussions about the world, politics, then usually we have this strange ambivalence between, on the one hand, thinkers like Steven Pinker, who say, everything in fact is going fine. The world is making progress, we still have economic growth, technology is pacing ahead, and this is, as for instance Mr. Harari said, this is in fact the ideal moment to be human. Never before people had so many opportunities to develop themselves, to devote themselves to creativity, to devote themselves to inventing things that make society better. So on the one hand, we have these optimists, but on the other hand, then still, we have images like these. There is Brexit. Brexit, I think, with instant consequences also for the business of many of you. How are we going to be able to serve the British market? What's the access going to be if this country truly exits? Interesting, I think, also is that if we look back 30 years ago, now precisely almost, when we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, that then we had the idea emerging that the world would become a more open place, a more peaceful place also. Yet still, what we have observed since the fall of the Berlin Wall, slowly but surely, a return of walls and protectionism, which you see in this chart. The Berlin Wall, which was about 150 kilometers long, today what we have everywhere in the world is walls together more than 14,000 kilometers long. So we had the one wall making place for a lot of other walls, which basically challenges this idea that thinkers like Pinker and Harari advance, that the world inevitably becomes a more open and cooperative place. What you see is a return of protectionism, of nationalism and defense. Very important also is that we also witness a return of armed conflict. Also in the early 90s, when the Soviet Union fell, many people start to take for granted that world politics would become more peaceful, that we would still compete amongst companies, but no longer among states. In this chart, you have an evolution of the number of armed conflicts in the world. Hence, conclusion also, the world isn't becoming a much more peaceful place. The number of refugees, I think, highlighted by this chart. The refugee crisis that we see around Europe is unprecedented. We have had humanitarian crises before. Think of the genocide in Rwanda, think of the civil war in former Yugoslavia, but never we had so many refugees as in today's world. Another important chart, and let me explain it briefly to you. In the last 20 years, we celebrated the idea of globalization, the world becoming one big village, in which for companies it would be as easily to trade here in Antwerp as, for example, in Tokyo, Japan. In the last few years, however, you see that economic globalization is tapering off, that globalization has stopped to advance, and also what is being showed by the green curve, globalization is not leading to democracy. What we have is still trade being quite large, but that you have a large number of countries tumbling back into dictatorship. Think of Russia, think of Turkey, and so forth. So, leading us then to the question, what is this all about? How should we understand that situation in which on the one hand you have people saying that we have the best of times, that this is really the time to be creative, to be innovative, yet on the other hand, then we have so many indications that things are falling apart, that we have an increase of protectionism, that we have an increase of conflicts. What explains this ambivalence? What explains this mixed picture? I think that if we try to make sense of the world around us, that we have to identify 4 very important underlying trends. Evolutions that shape world politics, world society, yet often in a way that is not very clear to us, certainly not in daily life. One first, very important explanation of the uncertainty is that we are witnessing a very, very profound shift in the balance of power. For the first time in decades, our part of the world, Europe, the United States, our tiny region on this planet, is losing power. Is losing power towards Russia, towards China, and so forth. And that makes a lot of people uncertain. Because what does it mean to lose power? That you have other countries defending their interests much more assertively. You have Turkey invading Syria, you have Saudi Arabia invading Yemen, and all kind of power plays manifesting themselves around Europe. Very important for this power shift is that it's not only about others becoming richer and we remaining at the same level of prosperity. The last 10 years, since 2009, many people in Europe actually became poorer. The purchasing power of citizens in Greece, Spain, Portugal, the United Kingdom is still below what it was 10 years ago. So we have others growing richer, but many in the Western world having more difficulties to survive. And that, of course, leads to a backlash. Many of these people who fear I'm not making progress, who feel that it's more difficult to get a decent job, go to vote, of course, for politicians that are more nationalistic and protectionistic. A second important evolution that is decisive in shaping the world today is a shift in the nature of growth. The world economy still grows, but what we have is that this growth of production is allowing societies less and less to create jobs. So on the one hand, often you have politicians saying, yeah, but we have economic recovery and we have GDP growth. But on the other hand, you have society asking, yeah, but what's in it for me? I don't see a lot of new jobs being created in the private sector, and my prosperity is not increasing, the opposite, I would say. A third important evolution, scarcity, environmental scarcity. This issue too is a bit complex because we have, on the one hand, a lot of very smart people in our universities and companies who have solutions for most environmental problems. We can create renewable energy. We have alternatives to traditional commodities. We can have biochemics, for instance, to have new fibers for the textile industry. But still, on the other hand, the poorest countries often do not really benefit from these scientific breakthroughs. To give one example, we can get sweet water out of salt water from the sea, but that costs $3 per cubic meter. So for most of the countries in Africa and India, this is not affordable. And this is, of course, a pity, because despite our scientists being very smart and innovative, a lot of countries lack the money and the finance to put it into practice, to bring it into reality. A last evolution that I would like to highlight is perhaps the most difficult one, and also less evident to understand in a context of world politics. And I usually identify that as a crisis of man. And perhaps it sounds a little bit dramatic, but let me explain you what I mean. We do not only see that economic growth makes it more difficult to create jobs and purchasing power, we also see that there is in many countries a growing disconnect between economic growth and happiness, between economic growth and also the extent to which people say, I'm capable of showing what I can. I'm capable at work of developing my talents. I think that what we have here in the room today is a bit of an exception. That's by and large a creative sector. A lot of people who are able to develop their talents, to be innovative, to be creative, but that only goes for a very small part of our society, about 4% of people who express that they can be very creative, which is of course a pity. On the one hand, we have the richest society, of one of the richest societies of the world in Europe. But on the other hand, you have so few people telling that prosperity allows them to be creative. And of course, creativity, I think, for an economy like ours is vital to keep progress going. Also, the capability to be creative is important politically, because what we observe is that people who feel that they are not so much respected, that have boring jobs, that have not much opportunities to take initiative at jobs, have political views that are more protectionist, that are more on the rightist side, and hence help explain the success of populist politicians like Donald Trump, Boris Johnson, and so forth. So we have more uncertainty, and then we have 4 evolutions that create this uncertainty, and these evolutions, I think, are only at the beginning. I don't think that they will go away anytime soon. What does this mean for world politics? As I said, we see the beginning of a return of nationalism. And I think this person, is one of the examples, but we have many more. What we also see is a return of economic power politics. Countries will fight harder and harder for jobs and industries, like China, with companies like Alibaba, who are supposed to bring to European consumers more made-in-China goods. Companies like Alibaba also, who have as a political mission to bypass traditional European and Western shops, retail chains. What China wants with this new economic power politics is to have a company that essentially brings what the Chinese industry produces all the way to European consumers, and then increasingly also tie to it the design and the creative part. Very difficult to understand, and it's very complicated and complex also in a way, this Chinese power politics, but I believe that in the future it will also have a big influence on sectors like fashion. If you imagine the industrial prowess of China to be connected to the distribution prowess of Alibaba, and then tie to it also more design and innovation, it will also emerge as an important competitor in this field. Even in geopolitics, the political tensions between countries, we certainly see that things are developing in an often very frightening way. It's no exaggeration to state that in Eastern Asia you have the beginning of a new arms race. Here with some of the new missile boats that are trying to keep the United States away in the South China Sea. China's effort, as you see with this Chinese map, to make sure that it slowly but surely builds a sphere of influence encompassing the Philippines, but also Taiwan and Japan. New missiles being commissioned. This Dongfeng 21D, never heard of it, I'm sure, is a missile that can destroy a big aircraft carrier 1,500 kilometers away. And that's only the Asia Pacific. In South Asia, countries like India too, you see an increase of nationalism. You see that politicians are pitting the Hindi majority against Muslim minority. You have drought and environmental scarcity leading farmers to commit suicide. The Middle East, ISIS, the Islamic State, now in Iraq being repressed, but underground still very much alive. You have Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, here in his new war room, who has begun an intervention in Syria, and of course also prompted reactions of Russia and Iran. You have Russia itself developing all around Europe very frightening missile systems. This missile is a so-called Bastion missile. What's a Bastion missile? It's a truck, as you can see, with 2 launchers being deployed, for instance, here in the Black Sea, the Crimea, but also in the Baltic Sea, that has the capacity of destroying all ships that enter these 2 seas at a distance of 600 kilometers. So imagine, you have a European ship sailing in, and Vladimir Putin pushes the button. It can destroy any ship if he wishes to do so. And that's only part of a much bigger defense system. This is usually what I call the Great Russian Firework. If we would have more time, we could review every single system, but it gives you a flavor of what is building up in terms of military capabilities all around Europe. What does this mean to us? I think when we look at the world from our viewpoint, from our perspective, we have different layers of uncertainty. The most distant layer of uncertainty, I think, is still the power play between China and the United States. That's a power play between giants about technology, about economic influence, and about military preponderance. A second layer of influence consists mostly of the poorest countries in the world. South Asia, for instance, India, Pakistan, but also most African countries. It's in this part of the world that the majority of people lives on less than $3 per day, yet where the population will grow by 2 billion people, imagine 2 billion people in the next 30, 40 years. In, of course, also very precarious environmental situations. It's here that you have a lack of water oftentimes. It's here that you have soil erosion. It's here that global warming also has a very important impact, leading to migration pressure, leading to instability. Third layer around Europe is our immediate neighborhoods, the Middle East, Russia, Northern Africa. Given the fact that Europe weakens economically, our industry is under pressure, for instance, our trade, it's also less easy for Europe to keep countries like Egypt, Morocco, Ukraine as partners, with as a result that other countries, again Russia, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, jump in that vacuum to grow their influence. So Europe is bit by bit losing clout and losing influence in its original sphere of interest. The fourth layer of uncertainty is the European Union itself. We have had Brexit. No, we didn't have Brexit yet, but it's about to come, I would at least consider. But also you see that inside the European Union, the tensions and the divisions between other countries, Germany and France, Italy, for example, are still very important and are only on the rise. That the European institutions also experience huge difficulties to grow the jobs that are important to preserve the support of the people. That it's very difficult for the European institutions to have a common answer towards the migration crisis. That it's very difficult also for the European Union to put its climate ambitions, for instance, into practice and to make it an opportunity also for entrepreneurs to do better. The fifth layer of uncertainty is our own society. And we cannot underestimate the importance of this aspect of my story. We look increasingly at the world with these wide open eyes. What is happening? What should we do? What can we do? Aren't we very powerless in this world? As a small company, can I have any influence? As a citizen, is there anything I can do? This uncertainty, this lack of confidence, this disorientation also, if you want, I think is probably the biggest challenge, if not threat, to our future, even more than all the big geopolitical challenge. I think if a society preserves its cohesion, preserves its energy and its ambition to do better, a society can withstand any external challenge. But at this moment, we don't know really how to do it. And I would say, first of all, also towards this sector, that we should not settle in an idea that we are powerless. We should not accept the notion that we are bound to undergo world politics instead of having the capability of shaping it. We must not settle in the idea that small companies or citizens cannot make a difference. We can make a difference. And I think we must make a difference. Also, as an entrepreneur, as a company, you have to ask yourself, what is it that we do? We want to survive, we want to make profit, that's for sure. But I think the main mission of entrepreneurs is to help contribute to a better society. A society that is prosperous, a society that also through its production and its economy is able to tell who it is. Look at this building. This was a marketplace, 19th century. But this building also expresses pride. This building expresses identity. This building expresses to a point the dynamism and the energy that the Antwerp society at that time had. I think economy and company and market is more than production per se. A good economy produces in a way that you help making a society proud, that you help also making a society creative and hopeful about its future. What is it then that the fashion sector can do in this challenging world? We must, of course, try to sell beautiful things to consumers in Antwerp and in many other places. But I think that there is also a more important mission. We must also try to let the creativity that is inherent to this sector radiate through the wider society. There is, I think, so much creativity here that we cannot accept it to be confined to fashion only. I would really encourage to go out and to engage, for instance, at schools, not only the Antwerp Fashion Academy, but also secondary schools, and help youngsters to explain what quality is in terms of fashion. Because let's be honest, as long as we don't explain young children what good fashion is, what good design is, what quality is, how can we expect them to buy the things that we produce, the things that we offer? So I think this is an engagement that we have to take. We learn children to make money, but we don't teach how to spend it. And I think here, the fashion industry should, I think, be more energetic and vigorous and ambitious to help young people understand what is really good, what is quality, and what defines a positive product. Another and final recommendation is not to let yourself be driven into the defense. Often what you get in situations like these is that we all retreat to our island and try to survive on our own. that we just look at the next day and try to stay afloat in the near future. I think this fashion industry, European fashion companies should have the ambition and the vision to try to reinvent, in a way, the entire production chain. From the raw material, the resources, over the industry of the fabric and the basic materials, the design, the retail, and so forth. If we lose the ambition in Europe and in the West to preserve a chain of production that is based on quality, that is based on sustainability, that is based also in treating human beings who produce with dignity, I think in the long run, being it retailers, being it designers, being it all these very creative people will also find it more difficult to preserve their position. Europe must have, I think, the vision not only of designing good things, but also making good things and explaining to European citizens why that matters. And if we learn to think this way, nothing impedes us from turning all the challenges that I had to describe to you into an opportunity to build an economy and a society that is better, that will still have challenges, but also the confidence to respond them. So my only modest message would be, don't be defeatist, appreciate and celebrate your creativity, but try to find the ambition and the vigor and the dedication to your society to make it radiate much bigger. Because investing in a society in the end is also investing in the customers of tomorrow and is making sure that you can continue your business in the years and generations to come. And I would like to conclude my brief story. Thank you very much.